In the summer of 1990, a man named David Harper packed up his old blue Jeep with camping gear, a cooler, and his 8-year-old daughter, Lena. It was something they did every year. A weekend out in the Montana mountains, just the two of them. After Lena's mother passed, those trips had become their way of staying close, of keeping life simple when everything else had changed. They left on a Friday morning. By Sunday night, when they didn't come home, no one worried at first. David was an experienced hiker, the kind of man who double-checked every map, who could start a fire in the rain. But by Monday afternoon, when Lena missed school and David's boss couldn't reach him, that confidence started to fade. When rangers found the Harper's car parked neatly at the Avalanche Creek trailhead, it looked almost staged, too still, too ordinary. The maps were folded in the glove box. 2 jackets lay across the back seat. A bag of trail mix sat open between them. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, no broken glass or dropped gear. Just a quiet car waiting for its owners to return. Days turned into weeks. Hundreds of searchers combed the valley, calling their names into a wilderness that never called back. Nothing was ever found. And over time, the story of David and Lena Harper slipped from the headlines and into the shadows. Another ghost story whispered around Pine Valley campfires. Then 25 years later, the mountains decided to speak again. In 2015, a lightning strike ignited a wildfire that tore through the same ridge where the Harpers had vanished. The fire raged for days, burning through the undergrowth and erasing everything that had once hidden beneath it. When the smoke finally cleared, a small forestry team was sent to survey the damage. One of them, a man named Evan Clark, was walking the burn zone when he noticed something strange under a fallen tree. It was small, half melted, and buried in ash. At first, he thought it was just a lump of plastic, maybe part of a lantern or a tool handle. But when he brushed away the soot, 3 faint letters appeared, the kind you'd see on a child's toy from another lifetime, SONY, and below them, barely visible through the warping, the model name, My First, a children's recorder. Red and gray, exactly like the one Lena Harper had carried everywhere. Evan radioed his supervisor. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I think I found the Harper girl's toy." The melted recorder was bagged, photographed, and sent to the state lab. Most people assumed the fire had destroyed anything inside, but it hadn't. The cassette, blackened and brittle, had somehow survived. Technicians cleaned it, humidified it, and against all odds, managed to play it. The first thing they heard was static, then wind, and beneath it, faintly, a man's whisper. "If anyone finds this, we're off the trail, near the Hollow Falls." The room went silent. It was the voice of David Harper. 25 years of mystery, and suddenly he was speaking again from the same mountains that took him. Before this melted toy resurfaced, the Harper disappearance was one of the mountain's oldest ghosts. Now, it wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was evidence. It was the kind of morning that tricks you into believing nothing bad can happen. The sky was clear, the roads dry, and the smell of pine rolled through the valley as David Harper tightened the straps on the roof rack of his old blue Jeep. His daughter, 8-year-old Lena, waited by the front door, clutching her favorite thing in the world, a red plastic recorder with a yellow mic cord. Her voice had filled that toy for weeks. She recorded everything: the family cat, her dad making pancakes, even the sound of rain on the window. This trip, she told him, was going to be her first real documentary. David smiled. "Then let's make it a good one," he said, and lifted her into the front seat. They backed out of the driveway, the house shrinking in the mirror, the rest of their lives still completely normal. Locals remembered them that morning. The attendant at Mason's Gas and Supply said David bought a tank of gas, 2 bottles of root beer, and a disposable camera. Lena stood on tiptoe at the counter, narrating into her recorder, "Day 1, we're going to find the biggest waterfall in the valley." She made everyone in the store laugh. David paid, thanked them, and waved goodbye. It was 9:42 a.m. That would be the last verified sighting of either of them. The Avalanche Creek Trail wasn't dangerous by reputation. It wound 4 miles through thick forest before opening to cliffs, pools, and waterfalls, perfect for a weekend trip. David had hiked it a dozen times growing up. He knew every bend, every ridge. That's why, when they didn't return, no one believed it could have simply been an accident. Sunday passed quietly. No calls, no sightings. By Monday morning, Lena's teacher noticed the empty desk, and David's foreman reported him missing from the site he was supervising outside Helena. At noon, a relative drove to David's house. The Jeep wasn't there, the lights were off, the answering machine full. By mid-afternoon, the county sheriff had a search team mobilized. When rangers reached Avalanche Creek trailhead around sunset, the forest looked calm, untouched, a postcard scene. And parked neatly in the small gravel lot sat the blue Jeep. The driver's side was locked. Inside, a folded trail map marked in red ink, a cooler with melted ice, and a pack of bubble gum half open. In the back seat lay 2 sleeping bags, neatly rolled, and Lena's small denim jacket. Nothing appeared out of place. The engine was cool. The car had been there for at least 2 days. One ranger later said, "It looked like they'd just stepped out to stretch their legs." Night fell fast. Searchers fanned out with flashlights, calling their names into the timber. "David! Lena!" Only the wind answered back. At dawn, the forest turned gold and eerily still. Teams combed the first 2 miles of trail, shoulder to shoulder, scanning for any trace, a footprint, a dropped wrapper, a campfire ring. They found nothing. Dogs followed a scent up the path until a narrow stone crossing, then suddenly spun in circles, whining and confused. The scent was just gone. By Tuesday afternoon, helicopters circled overhead, sweeping the ridgelines with infrared. No heat signatures, no motion, just endless trees. Back at the command post, maps covered folding tables. Lines and circles marked where teams had already searched. A volunteer pointed out how impossible it was for a man and child to vanish in a place with that much visibility. Every trail looped back to the same small valley, and yet there was nothing. For David's sister, Margaret, the waiting was unbearable. She told reporters he'd never take her off trail. Never. She brought photos. David holding Lena at a county fair, the 2 of them laughing on a hiking bridge the year before. Every picture made the same argument. This was not a man running away. By the end of the week, nearly 100 volunteers had joined the search. They found a crushed soda can that tested negative for fingerprints, a torn piece of fabric that didn't match their clothing, and several boot prints belonging to rescuers themselves. The forest, as one ranger put it, was eating every clue as fast as we could find it. After 9 days, the official search was scaled back. The helicopters left. The volunteers went home, and Avalanche Creek returned to silence. What remained was a car, a few pages of notes in a case file, and a story that no one could explain. People in Pine Valley began saying the same uneasy sentence whenever the subject came up. They just disappeared. The sheriff's report closed with a single understated line: "No physical evidence recovered, presumed lost in wilderness." But in Pine Valley, the locals never believed that. They said the forest didn't just keep the Harpers, it kept their voices too. And for the next 25 years, Those mountains would hold on to the truth tighter than anyone could imagine. By the second day, Avalanche Creek didn't look like a hiking trail anymore. It looked like a command center. Trucks lined the gravel lot. Park rangers, deputies, and volunteers came from 3 counties over. Folding tables were stacked with radios, maps, and thermoses of black coffee. Every few minutes, a helicopter thundered overhead, its blades scattering ash and pine needles across the dirt. Hope was still alive then. People told each other, "It's a father and daughter. They probably just got turned around." But by the third morning, that hope began to wear thin. The first search team left at dawn, heading up the main trail toward the waterfalls. 2 search dogs led the way, a German shepherd named Duke and a bloodhound named Maggie. They followed a scent for almost 2 miles before stopping abruptly near a rocky ravine. The handlers watched in confusion as both dogs circled, noses down, whining softly. Then they just stopped. No further direction, no pull, nothing to indicate a trail, as if the scent had evaporated into the stone itself. Searchers combed the ravine for hours. No footprints, no dropped gear, no sign that anyone, adult or child, had passed that way. By evening, the sheriff called in additional teams. They spread across a 10-mile radius, grid by grid, yard by yard. Infrared drones and helicopter cameras swept the ridgelines. They found plenty of wildlife, deer, elk, even a black bear family in the higher brush, but not a trace of David or Lena Harper. A ranger later told a local reporter, "We should have found something, anything, a boot print, a granola wrapper. Even if they'd fallen, you'd expect torn fabric, bones, something, but there was nothing, like they'd never been there at all." As the days passed, the theories began. Maybe David slipped and fell with Lena in his arms. Maybe a sudden flash flood caught them near the ravine. But the weather that weekend had been calm. No storms, no rain, no high water. An animal attack? Experts ruled that out within hours. There would have been evidence, drag marks, torn clothes, blood. There was none. Some whispered darker ideas, that maybe David had planned it, that he'd taken Lena somewhere else and staged it to look like a disappearance. But that theory crumbled fast. There were no unusual withdrawals from his bank account, no note, no indication of planning, and everyone who knew David described him the same way. Stable, kind, completely devoted to his daughter. He was a man building a life, not running from one. By the end of the first week, over 200 people had joined the search. Locals brought food, volunteers brought horses, and families donated supplies. Night after night, the forest echoed with flashlights, cutting through darkness, and voices calling 2 names that never answered back. Each morning, the rescuers would gather for briefing. The same map spread across the hood of a ranger's truck, red, circles marking where they'd already searched. Each day, the circles grew wider, and the hope inside them grew smaller. On the 9th day, the search team found something that froze everyone in place. A small red shoelace hanging from a branch just off the main trail. But when they bagged it and brought it in, DNA tests later confirmed it didn't belong to Lena. Just another false alarm. By the 12th day, exhaustion set in. Some volunteers had begun quietly admitting what no one wanted to say out loud, that the forest wasn't going to give them anything back. Not because it was hiding something, but because maybe, somehow, there really was nothing to find. A reporter covering the search wrote, "It's not just that they disappeared, it's the way they did it, so completely, so cleanly, it defies explanation." The Harper family refused to leave. David's sister slept in her car at the trailhead. insisting she'd feel it if her brother and niece were close. Every night, she'd sit on the hood of her car, staring at the tree line, whispering the same prayer, "Bring them home." But the forest stayed quiet. After 2 full weeks, the official search was scaled back. The helicopters were grounded. The last rescue dog team packed up their gear. All that remained were the locals, a handful of people who couldn't let it go. They searched on weekends, brought metal detectors, even rented sonar equipment to scan nearby ponds. They found nothing. By October, the case file was moved from active search to missing persons, cold status. And just like that, one of the biggest search operations in Montana's history faded into silence. The years that followed turned facts into folklore. Kids growing up in Pine Valley would hear warnings from their parents. Don't go too far up Avalanche Creek. That's where the Harpers vanished. The old-timers added their own details. That strange noises were heard the night they disappeared, or that compasses went haywire near the ravine. None of it could be proven, but somehow it all felt connected. Every logical path the investigators followed ended the same way, at nothing. No reason, no trace, no answers. And as one detective later said in a documentary interview, the Harper case is where logic stops working. Every path ends where logic does. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, even the ones carved by grief. But in Pine Valley, the story of David and Lena Harper never faded. It just changed shape. Years turned into decades, and life went on. New families moved in, old businesses closed, and the forest slowly swallowed the old search trails. The red tape markers tied to tree trunks turned gray, then vanished altogether. But for the people who lived through it, the Harpers were never gone. Not really. Each October, when the air turned thin and the leaves caught fire with color, David's sister, Margaret, would drive her pickup up to Avalanche Creek. She always came alone. At the base of the trail, near the small wooden sign that read, "Entering Wilderness Area," she'd place a bouquet of yellow daisies, the same flowers Lena had picked on their last family trip before her mother died. She never said much. Sometimes she'd whisper a few words. Sometimes she'd just stand there, waiting. The rangers got used to her visits. One of them said, it was like she was visiting two graves that never existed. As the years passed, the case became part of local folklore. The kids who'd been in Lena's class grew up, started families of their own, and told their children stories about the trail that eats people. Most didn't mean it literally. It was just the way the story had settled into the town's bones. Like something half remembered, half believed. In diners and gas stations, people still spoke their names, not with fear, more with a kind of quiet awe. Everyone had their own theory. Some believed they'd gotten lost and never found their way back. Others said David might have fallen trying to protect her, and they both went down the ravine. But there was another story, one that made people lower their voices. A few locals claimed that on the night of October 6th, 1990, strange sounds were heard echoing through the valley, a metallic rhythm like steel scraping against rock. At first, those who lived near the foothills thought it was machinery, maybe miners or loggers working late, but there hadn't been active mining in the region for over 40 years. And when deputies checked for construction or maintenance reports, there were none. No one could explain it. The story took on a life of its own. Teenagers would hike up the trail at night, daring each other to hear the Harper sound. They'd record hours of forest silence and swear they caught faint metallic clanks on tape. Most of it was imagination, the kind that grows in places where tragedy never found an ending. For Margaret, those stories hurt more than they helped. She didn't want her brother turned into a ghost story. He was a man, a good one, who packed lunches, braided his daughter's hair, and always showed up when people needed help. Every year, she wrote a letter to the county office asking them to reopen the case. Every year, she got the same polite response: no new evidence, case remains inactive. But still, she kept writing, because for her, hope was a habit she couldn't break. By the late 2000s, Pine Valley had become quieter, older. The sawmill that once employed half the town closed down. The local newspaper folded, and in the empty space those things left behind, the Harper story remained one of the last pieces of shared memory. If you walked into Grady's diner on any given morning, you could still hear someone mention it. Old-timers at the counter swapping theories. One would say, "You ask me, they went down that ravine. Nobody searched deep enough." Another would shake his head. "No, no, I was there. Dogs stopped dead. You don't lose scent like that unless something else is going on." Then they'd fall silent, stirring their coffee, both knowing there was nothing new to say. By 2010, even the sheriff who led the original search had retired. He was asked in a radio interview what case still haunted him the most. He didn't hesitate. "The Harpers," he said, "because we had everything: daylight, dogs, manpower, and still came back empty. The woods don't do that. The woods don't erase people." The interviewer asked what he thought really happened. He paused. "I don't know," he said, "but I think the forest knows. It just hasn't decided to tell us yet." That quote stayed with the town. It was printed on postcards, even engraved on a small wooden plaque at the base of Avalanche Creek. And so, the story settled, not solved, not forgotten, just there, like fog that refused to lift. By the summer of 2015, 25 years had passed since the Harpers vanished. Most people assumed that was the end, a mystery frozen in time, waiting for history to quietly let it go. But that same summer, the dry heat rolled in, the rivers sank low, the forests grew brittle, ready to burn, and one afternoon, a single lightning bolt struck deep in the valley. That spark would start the fire, and that fire would start everything else. By the summer of 2015, Pine Valley had forgotten what rain felt like. The rivers had shrunk to thin, muddy veins, and the trees stood brittle under a white, angry sky. Locals said even the air smelled like dust and static. Then, on August 14th, a storm rolled in, the kind that promised relief but brought something else instead. A single bolt of lightning struck a ridgeline deep inside the Avalanche Creek Basin, right where the old Harper search had ended 25 years earlier. Within minutes, dry brush caught fire. Within hours, it was a wall of flame. The wind carried it down through the valley, turning night into a flickering red dawn. Helicopters dumped water, crews dug containment lines, and for nearly a week, Pine Valley watched as the forest that had once swallowed the Harpers now burned in plain sight. When it was finally over, more than 30,000 acres were gone, a blackened scar stretching across the mountains. What was once a lush maze of cedar and pine was now a field of smoke and silence. Weeks later, when the ash had cooled and the headlines faded, a small team from the State Forestry Department arrived to assess the damage. Their job was simple: mark dead zones, check soil conditions, and document anything worth preserving. The air was still heavy, with the smell of charred wood and melted sap. Boots crunched on layers of ash that used to be leaves. Among them was Evan Clark, a quiet surveyor who'd worked these forests for nearly 20 years. He'd grown up hearing the Harper story. It was part of local DNA, like the smell of pine pitch or the sound of distant river water. He never believed much in ghost stories, but even he admitted there was something uneasy about being back here. As he walked the slope near the old trailhead, marking coordinates on a clipboard, something caught his eye, a glint of color in the ash. It was small, half buried beneath the roots of a burnt-out tree. At first, he thought it was a piece of trash, maybe a melted canteen or a shard of glass, but when he brushed away the soot, the shape underneath was unmistakable, a rectangle, rounded corners, fused buttons, and beneath the smoke stains, a faint hint of red. He crouched, brushed gently with his glove, and revealed what looked like an old portable recorder, warped, melted, but still recognizable. Across the discolored plastic, 3 letters had somehow survived the fire. SONY. Evan stared at it for a long moment before saying anything. It looked ancient, something from another life. He turned it over carefully, and a small microphone wire snapped off in his hand. The device was half fused into the roots of the tree, as if the earth itself had been holding it there. He called for another crew member, who took a few photos and radioed the supervisor. When they logged the object into their report, Evan wrote the description as plainly as he could. Melted red plastic device, possibly a child's. Recorder. Coordinates attached. They sealed it in an evidence bag, marked it for retrieval, and didn't think much more of it. Not yet. That evening, when the photos were uploaded to the department database, one technician stopped scrolling and leaned closer to the screen. He recognized it instantly. He'd grown up in Pine Valley, too. Every kid in town knew that toy because it had belonged to Lena Harper. He called his supervisor over. "Look at this," he said quietly. "That's from the Harper case." Within hours, the photo made its way up the chain to the county sheriff's office, and by morning, a cold case detective named Sarah Kent was standing in the forestry outpost, holding the sealed bag in her gloved hands. It was heavier than she expected, solid, fused shut, the edges warped like lava rock. Inside, she could just make out the cloudy outline of a cassette tape. The label was burned away, but the shape was enough. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. "This belonged to the little girl," she said softly. "Lena Harper." For a long moment, no one spoke. It wasn't the kind of discovery people celebrated. It was the kind that made the air go still. The device was transferred to the Montana State Forensic Laboratory in Helena. Technicians logged it as Evidence Jar M 2015 4. The chain of custody form listed the date, the coordinates, and a final line written in pen, possible connection to 1990 Avalanche Creek disappearance. For 25 years, the Harper case had been nothing but stories, rumors, theories, unanswered questions. Now, for the first time, there was something real. Not a photograph, not a memory, a physical piece of that weekend, scorched but undeniable. It was strange to think that an object so small, so fragile, had survived both time and fire, when everything else, even the people themselves, had not. In the melted plastic of a forgotten toy, the past began whispering again. At the Montana State Forensic Laboratory, the melted recorder sat sealed inside a transparent evidence box. The tag read, "Recovered August 2015, Avalanche Creek Burn Zone." For weeks, it was just another piece of scorched plastic sitting on a shelf in the evidence room, until a technician named Eli Warren noticed the faint shape of a cassette through the warped casing. He'd been with the lab for nearly 20 years and had seen everything: old tapes from crime scenes, half-burned journals, even cassettes recovered from car fires. But something about this one felt different. The red casing, the melted buttons, the weight of it. He knew the Harper case. Everyone did. The recorder was brought to his desk, where he began the slow surgical process of disassembly. Every movement was deliberate. The outer shell crumbled under gentle pressure, flaking apart like charcoal. Inside, beneath a nest of melted plastic and corroded metal, sat a small, warped cassette. Its magnetic tape fused in places but still coiled, still whole. "It's fragile," Eli said quietly to his partner, "but it's there." They logged every step, documenting temperature, humidity, and surface condition. The tape was then placed in a humidity chamber, an effort to slowly soften the brittle film so it wouldn't snap when unspooled. It took 3 days. When the chamber finally opened, the room smelled faintly of melted plastic and dust. Using fine tweezers and magnifying goggles, Eli began unwinding the tape. It moved stiffly, with a faint, gritty sound. He cleaned it inch by inch with isopropyl swabs, removing decades of soot and ash. Every centimeter was another heartbeat of patience. By the end of the week, he'd cleaned enough to mount the tape onto a new reel. Now came the part that made everyone in the lab gather quietly near the workstation. They powered up an old Tascam 122 deck, one of the few machines gentle enough for degraded tapes. A technician pressed play. The first sound was a long, deep hiss, followed by faint pops of static. Then nothing, just the hollow noise of time. Eli adjusted the pitch wheel, shifted filters, tried again. Static, a low hum, the faint click of an old microphone button being pressed down, and then something. A murmur, so faint it almost blended into the noise. "Hold on," he said. "Back that up." They rewound, replayed, filtered, and slowly, under layers of hiss, a voice began to take shape. It was deep, calm, tired, human. "If anyone finds this—" Everyone in the room froze. No one moved, no one spoke. They just listened. The voice continued, breaking through the noise in fragments. "We're off the trail, near the hollow falls." There was a pause, long enough that you could hear the faint rush of wind and leaves brushing against the microphone, then the rustle of fabric, and a smaller, lighter voice spoke. "Dad, is it closer now?" It was a child's voice, soft, scared, but trying to sound brave. And just like that, everyone in the lab knew what they were hearing. David and Lena Harper. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then came a faint metallic scraping sound in the background, sharp and uneven like metal dragging across stone. It repeated once, twice. Then the tape cut out with a pop, leaving only the hiss. Eli leaned back, took off his headphones, and stared at the machine. No one said anything for a while. Finally, the lab director whispered, "It's him. It's really him." They played it again, this time recording it digitally, enhancing what they could. Every repetition revealed small details, the sound of breath, a single word muttered under his breath that was too distorted to recognize. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the sound of a man lost. It was the sound of a man hiding. News traveled fast. Within a week, the sheriff's office confirmed the voice as belonging to David Harper, verified by family recordings. Margaret, his sister, was brought in to listen. They gave her headphones and pressed play. She covered her mouth when she heard Lena's voice. And when David's whisper came through the static, "If anyone finds this," she closed her eyes and began to cry. After the tape finished, she sat there for a long time before speaking. "He wasn't panicking," she said softly. "He was trying to leave a trail. He thought someone would come." The forensic report noted something subtle. The wind patterns and background acoustics on the tape didn't match the trail area where the Jeep had been found. Instead, They matched recordings from a nearby ravine system, one that ended near a collapsed section of canyon known locally as the Hollow Falls. It was steep, isolated, and off limits even in the 1990s. The idea that David had managed to reach it with an 8-year-old was almost impossible unless they were running from something. The metal scraping described in the recording sparked debate across the state. Experts suggested it could have been the sound of shifting boulders, glacial movement, or even the resonance of old mining equipment buried in the mountain, but no one could explain why David described it as closer. Movement implies intent, and that's what unsettled everyone the most. In one local news interview, the sheriff said, "We didn't just hear a message from the past, we heard fear." The restored clip was less than 40 seconds long, but it changed the entire narrative of the case. For 25 years, people had said the Harpers got lost, that nature had taken them. But now, listening to that tape, the forest felt less like a place that consumed them and more like something they were trying to escape from. The last seconds of the recording were just static, the faint hum of the microphone still active, and then a soft click, the end of the reel. Eli listened one last time before logging it as complete. How? Stared at the waveform on his screen and whispered, almost to himself, "The forest kept this for us, for them." For a quarter century, the mountains had been silent. Now their silence had a voice, and everyone who heard it understood the same terrible truth. David and Lena Harper hadn't vanished into the wilderness. They'd been running from something inside it. The forest had kept that moment sealed in plastic and ash for 25 years. Now it had finally spoken. The Harper tape changed everything. For a generation, their story had been a mystery built on silence. Now there was sound, 40 seconds of it, and that sound rewrote every theory anyone ever had. The official statement from the county read simply, "Audio recovered from a device linked to the 1990 Avalanche Creek disappearance indicates possible off-trail movement and unidentified background noise." It was a bureaucratic way of saying we still don't understand what happened, but for the people who heard the recording, it wasn't the words that haunted them, it was the tone. David Harper didn't sound lost. He sounded aware, focused. He knew something was out there. Within a month of the tape's authentication, new search efforts began. Investigators from the state police, forensic geologists, and even 2 retired rescue trackers returned to Avalanche Creek for the first time in 2 decades. The terrain had changed. The wildfire had stripped away everything. The trees, the undergrowth, the cover that had once hidden the valley's secrets. What remained was bare earth, black rock, and quiet. On the 3rd day, searchers descended toward the base of a narrow ravine that matched the Hollow Falls mentioned in David's voice. It wasn't an actual waterfall anymore, more a series of collapsed rock shelves carved by centuries of erosion. The air there felt heavier, muffled, as though even sound struggled to escape. Halfway down, a volunteer noticed a pattern in the ash, a shallow depression filled with debris. They began digging carefully, pulling back layers of charred roots and gray dust. Beneath it, they found fragments of bone, weathered, partial, sun-bleached long before the fire ever touched them. When the first piece was lifted into light, the valley went silent. The bones were taken to the state forensic unit in Helena. It took only a week for DNA results to come back. They belonged to David Harper. That confirmation brought closure for some, but not for everyone, because there was no sign of Lena. No smaller bones, no remains, no trace of her anywhere within the half-mile search radius. It was as if she'd simply vanished into another story. Margaret Harper attended the press conference where the findings were announced. She stood behind the microphones, clutching a worn photo of her brother and niece. When a reporter asked if she believed Lena could still be alive, she said only, "The tape says she was still with him when it ended, so wherever he went next, she was with him too." The discovery reignited public obsession. News outlets replayed the recovered audio on loop, that whisper of, "if anyone finds this," followed by the faint scraping sound that no one could explain. Experts from every corner tried to. A geologist claimed it was glacial movement, the sound of rock shifting after decades of pressure. An engineer suggested old mining machinery, buried deep and still, settling underground. An audio analyst said it could have been metal tools dropped and echoing through a cavern, but none of those explanations accounted for what people heard in David's voice. Fear, recognition. He knew that sound wasn't natural. Even Eli Warren, the technician who'd restored the tape, said later in an interview, "There's a moment right before the tape ends. A single breath he takes. It's sharp, startled. He wasn't describing a sound. He was reacting to something moving toward him." Theories multiplied, online forums filled with speculation. Some argued David had stumbled upon something illegal, an abandoned mine or a hidden operation, and someone made sure he never came back. Others believed it was simpler, darker, and more tragic, that he fell trying to protect Lena, that the scraping was just stone against metal from his own gear. But one theory spread quietly, whispered more than written, that the forest itself wasn't finished keeping its secrets. The fire hadn't revealed the truth, it had just disturbed it. A month after the discovery, a second analysis of the tape revealed something new, barely audible at the very end. Right after the rustle and Lena's question, there was a faint, rhythmic sound underneath the static. Not mechanical, not wind, something like footsteps breaking through leaves. 3 or 4 steps, then a sudden stop, then nothing. The technicians who reviewed it disagreed on whether it was real or artifact, but to those who'd worked the original case, it didn't matter. It fit the final note of David's voice, that quiet dread before the tape went dead. Whatever he'd been hearing in those woods, it reached them. In October, searchers hiked deeper into the Hollow Falls region, hoping to find where Lena might have gone. They found remnants of an old trail long since overgrown, and near it, fragments of red plastic scattered in the soil. Tests confirmed they matched the same recorder casing. It meant the device had broken apart during or after the fire, scattering its pieces across the slope. Somewhere in that chaos, the rest of their story still lay buried. The final investigation report was clinical, as if written by someone trying to cage a ghost with logic. Partial remains consistent with adult male recovered at approximate location of historic disappearance. Cause of death undetermined due to environmental degradation, secondary subject unaccounted for. But those who'd been part of the search knew better. The case was no longer just about a missing father and child. It was about a sound that no one could identify and a silence that no one could explain. When Margaret visited the site one last time before winter, she stood near the hollow and whispered, "You did everything right, David." The forest was quiet, but not empty. Somewhere in the wind, through the bare trees and blackened branches, there was a faint hum, not enough to prove anything, but enough to make her look up and listen. Whatever David feared that night, it found them. And after 25 years, it still hasn't let go. Today, the melted recorder sits behind glass in the Pine Valley Historical Museum, a small brick building tucked between a diner and an old post office. There's no fanfare, no crowds, just a single display case with a dim light above it and a small white label that reads, "Recovered from Avalanche Creek Burn Zone, 2015." Believed to belong to Lena Harper, missing since 1990. The recorder is barely recognizable now. Half melted, its buttons fused together, its red color faded to a dull rose gray. But if you look closely, you can still see the outline of the little built-in microphone and the faint indentation where a small hand once held it. Beside it sits a simple button. When visitors press it, speakers hidden in the wall release a faint hiss, followed by that fragile, trembling whisper, "If anyone finds this." It plays for less than a minute, just enough to capture the breath, the rustle, the static. Then the sound fades, and the museum returns to silence. Every year, on the anniversary of the day they disappeared, Margaret Harper comes to the museum. She doesn't make a scene. She never asks for attention. She just walks past the displays of mining tools and old maps until she reaches the small glass case in the corner. The staff knows her by now. They quietly give her space. She stands there for a few minutes, looking at the recorder, at what's left of her brother's voice, sealed forever in plastic and ash. Sometimes she presses the button, sometimes she doesn't. But every year, before she leaves, she leans forward slightly and whispers the same words. "He did everything right." And then she walks out, leaving behind the sound of her own breath fogging the glass for just a second before it fades away. Over time, the Harper case stopped being about tragedy and became something else entirely, a story about how fragile memories really are and how even the smallest thing can outlast everything else. For years, the mountains kept their silence, hiding two lives somewhere in the folds of rock and time. Maybe that was cruelty, or maybe it was protection, a way of keeping something sacred until the world was ready to hear it. That's what the museum curator once said in an interview. Sometimes the earth doesn't keep secrets to be cruel. It keeps them until someone is ready to listen. It's strange, but there's comfort in that idea, because the Harper story isn't about how they vanished anymore. It's about what survived: a father's voice, a daughter's question, and 40 seconds of sound that somehow outlived fire, weather, and silence. Visitors who hear the recording often describe the same thing. They say it doesn't sound like fear. It sounds like love, like a man trying to leave behind one last breadcrumb, one final message, hoping it might someday guide someone home. And maybe that's what the forest was waiting for all along. Not to scare, not to haunt, but to remind that in the middle of all that vast, indifferent wilderness, there was once a father whispering into the dark, not for himself, but for his little girl. Today, the trail at Avalanche Creek is open again. The signs are new. The trees are smaller, but the valley still feels heavy, like it remembers. If you walk it at dusk, you can still hear the creek running under the rocks, the same place where David and Lena camped on their last night. There's a small plaque nailed to a pine near the trailhead. It reads simply, "In memory of David and Lena Harper, 1990. Some voices never fade. Hikers leave flowers or notes tucked under stones. Some say they can feel a presence there, quiet and watching, like the mountain itself is still listening. Maybe it is, because even now, decades later, that faint voice continues to echo across the airwaves, through recordings, through retellings, a whisper that's traveled farther than its owner ever could. The forest may never tell the full story. Maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe the answer was always there, not in the mystery, but in the message. And in the static of that small red recorder, one father's voice still crosses the years, still reaching through the silence, still calling out, "If anyone finds this,